On Father's Day, my daughter gave her father-in-law a $15,000 cruise package while sliding me a crumpled $2 lottery ticket. "If you're lucky, Dad," she smirked, "maybe half of your winnings will be mine." I smiled and tucked that ticket away. 3 days later, that worthless slip of paper made me $120 million richer, and I finally understood what my daughter truly deserved. She got exactly what she earned, and it wasn't half of anything. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments, what would you do with $120 million? The morning sun streamed through the windows of Richard's sprawling mansion in Westchester County, casting long shadows across the marble floors that probably cost more than my entire apartment. I sat in the corner of their oversized living room, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, watching my daughter Evelyn flutter around her father-in-law like a moth drawn to flame. At 35, she moved with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to navigate wealth that wasn't originally hers, her designer dress rustling softly as she arranged gift boxes on the mahogany coffee table. "Dad, Richard," she cooed, using that special tone she reserved for him, warm, affectionate, respectful. Never the tone she used with me anymore. "I have something very special for you this Father's Day." She lifted a pristine white envelope from Tiffany's, the kind that screamed expensive even before you opened it. Richard, at 58, had the kind of salt and pepper hair that looked distinguished rather than old, and the confident posture of a man who had built his construction empire from nothing. He accepted the envelope with the slight smile of someone accustomed to being celebrated. The silence in the room felt heavy as he opened it. Even Michael, my son-in-law, looked up from his phone with genuine curiosity. When Richard's eyes widened and he let out a low whistle, I knew whatever was in that envelope was substantial. "Evelyn, this is a 2-week Mediterranean cruise. First-class suite. $15,000? His voice carried genuine surprise, though I caught something else underneath. A flicker of discomfort that passed so quickly I might have imagined it. My stomach dropped as the reality hit me. $15,000. "You deserve it, Dad, Richard," Evelyn said, her voice practically glowing with pride. "You've worked so hard, and you've been such an incredible father figure, not just to Michael, but to me too." She glanced in my direction for just a moment, and I saw something in her eyes that made my chest tighten. Some fathers give you life. Others give you a future. The coffee cup trembled slightly in my hands. I set it down carefully on the side table, the small clink of ceramic on wood seeming to echo in the sudden quiet. So there had never been an investment. Richard cleared his throat, his fingers drumming once against his knee, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years whenever Evelyn spoke poorly of me in front of him. "This is very generous, sweetheart," he said finally, though his voice carried less enthusiasm than his words suggested. "Very thoughtful." Then Evelyn turned to me, and I watched her expression shift like someone adjusting a mask. The warmth faded, replaced by something that looked almost like obligation. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled lottery ticket, the kind you buy at the gas station counter without much thought. $2, the same price as a candy bar. "And for you, Dad," she said, the word "Dad" landing flat, perfunctory. She held it out between 2 fingers like it might contaminate her manicured nails. "I thought you might enjoy a little excitement." I stared at that ticket for a long moment, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. The contrast was so stark, it was almost funny. $15,000 of my own money given to another man versus $2. A luxury cruise versus a piece of paper with random numbers. A future adventure versus a 1 in 300 million long shot. "If you're lucky, Dad," Evelyn continued, and now there was definitely a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth, "maybe half of your winnings will be mine. That's how it works, right? Does the family share everything?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just the casual cruelty of them, but the assumption behind them. That even if I won, even if lightning struck, she would still be entitled to half. That my good fortune would automatically become hers, the same way my emergency fund had apparently become her gift budget, the same way my sacrifices had become her resources without acknowledgement or gratitude. I took the ticket from her fingers, careful not to let my hand shake. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said quietly, tucking it into my wallet next to my driver's license. The paper felt rough against my fingertips, cheap and insubstantial. Very thoughtful of you. Michael shifted uncomfortably on the couch, but said nothing. He rarely said anything when his wife and her father were in the same room, as if he'd learned long ago that neutrality was his safest position. Richard was studying his coffee cup with unusual intensity, his jaw working slightly, as if he were chewing over words he couldn't quite swallow. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of forced conversation and awkward silences. I watched Evelyn show off her new jewelry to Richard's other children, watched her post carefully curated photos on Instagram, multiple shots of Richard holding his cruise envelope, one distant shot of me in the background, barely in frame. She talked animatedly about their plans, about the restaurants they'd try, about how much Richard deserved this recognition for all his hard work and generosity. Not once did she mention the 25 years I'd worked double shifts to put her through private school. Not once did she acknowledge the apartment I'd downsized to, or the vacations I'd never taken, or the truck I'd sold to buy her a laptop for college. And certainly not once did she mention where the $15,000 for Richard's cruise had actually come from. As the afternoon wound down and I prepared to leave, Richard walked me to the door. For a moment we stood on his front steps, two fathers in the gathering dusk, and I caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You raised a good woman," he said finally, his voice careful and measured. "Sometimes they just need time to remember where they came from." I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady. "I just want her to be happy, Richard, even if she doesn't see me the same way anymore." Something shifted in his expression then, a flicker of what looked almost like pain. "Happiness built on the wrong foundation never lasts," he said quietly. Then louder, "Drive safe, Tom. And good luck with that ticket." I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, past perfect lawns and perfect houses, with that $2 lottery ticket burning a hole in my wallet, like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong between my daughter and me. I thought about the woman I'd raised, the little girl who used to curl up in my lap and ask me to read the same bedtime story over and over again. I wondered where that child had gone, and whether there was any way to bring her back. The numbers on that ticket were 15, 23, 42, 8, 19, and 31. I'd been playing those same numbers for 20 years. Evelyn's birthday, the day her mother died, our wedding anniversary. Dates that meant everything to me and, apparently, nothing to her. But sometimes, in the strange mathematics of fate, nothing can become everything. And sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who teach us exactly what we're worth. 35 years ago, I held my newborn daughter for the first time in the maternity ward of St. Mary's Hospital. Amanda, my wife, was exhausted but radiant. "She's perfect, Tom," she whispered. Evelyn had her mother's eyes, wide, curious, impossibly blue. I was 27 then, working as a mechanic at Patterson's auto shop. We lived in a 2-bedroom rental on Maple Street. "I'm going to give you everything," I whispered to Evelyn that first night. "I'm going to work so hard for you." When Evelyn was 10, Amanda started getting tired more often. The doctors ran expensive tests. When they finally gave us the word, breast cancer, stage 3, I felt like the ground had opened up beneath my feet. We spent 2 years fighting. I worked double shifts, sometimes pulling 16-hour days, coming home exhausted but still finding energy to help Evelyn with homework and tuck her into bed. Amanda passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. Evelyn was 12, and I realized I was now solely responsible for making sure this broken child grew up whole. I sold the house and moved us into a smaller apartment. High school was expensive. Evelyn was brilliant, and she wanted advanced placement classes, debate teams, and school trips. I said yes to everything, picking up weekend work to pay for SAT prep and college applications. "Dad, the dorm fees are due," she'd call from Northwestern, and I'd figure out which bill I could pay late to make it work. Each request was reasonable, and I never said no, not once. I worked holidays so other mechanics could spend time with their families. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for most meals. I wore the same 3 shirts for 2 years. My truck was 15 years old and made terrible sounds, but I kept fixing it because every dollar saved went toward Evelyn's future. When she graduated summa cum laude, I was the proudest father in the auditorium. During her graduation party at my small apartment, she hugged me tight. "Thank you for everything, Dad. I'm going to make you proud." And she did at first. She got a good job, then a better one. She called weekly, visited monthly, and brought gifts from business trips. For a while, it felt like we were building something together. Then she met Michael at a company conference. Michael, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in Westchester County. Michael, who drove a BMW and had never worked a day until his father gave him a vice president title. The change was gradual. Evelyn's calls became shorter, less frequent. Her visits stretched to holidays only. She'd arrive at my apartment and look around with barely concealed disappointment. "Dad, you should really think about upgrading this place," she said one Christmas. "You work so hard. Don't you want to treat yourself?" The wedding was held at Richard's Country Club with 300 guests. I wore my one good suit, the same one from Amanda's funeral, and tried to blend into the background. When Evelyn introduced me to her new in-laws, there was something apologetic in her voice. "This is my father, Tom. He's been working so hard his whole life." After the wedding, visits became even rarer. Evelyn would call on birthdays, her voice bright but distracted. She'd tell me about trips to Europe, their new house, Richard's business acquisitions. When I'd try to share my own news, I could hear her attention drifting. 3 months ago, she called asking for a favor. "Dad, I need to borrow $15,000. There's this amazing investment opportunity, and our cash is tied up in house renovation." My entire emergency fund. "It's for our future, Dad. I'll pay you back with interest when the investment matures." I transferred the money that same day, not because I believed in the investment, but because she was my daughter. I didn't hear from her again until Father's Day, when she handed me that lottery ticket and made her joke about getting half the winnings. Now, sitting in my apartment Monday morning, I stared at that ticket on my kitchen table. I'd checked the lottery website out of habit. When the page loaded and I saw the winning numbers in bright red, my coffee cup slipped and shattered on the floor. $120 million. $75 million after taxes. I sat there staring at those numbers, feeling something shift inside my chest. For 35 years, I'd defined myself by what I could give my daughter. For the last 5 years, I'd watched her define me by what I couldn't. But now I had something entirely mine. Something she couldn't diminish or explain away to her friends. I thought about her smirk. "Maybe half of your winnings will be mine." The casual assumption that even my good fortune would automatically become hers, that I existed primarily as an extension of her life rather than as a person with my own dreams and worth. The lottery ticket felt different now, not like cheap paper, but like a key to a door I'd forgotten existed. For the first time in years, I was curious to see what was on the other side. Friday evening arrived with spring warmth that made everything feel possible. I sat on my small balcony, nursing a beer and watching the sun set over the neighborhood I'd called home for 15 years. The official lottery certificate was tucked safely in my desk drawer, along with foundation paperwork Harold had prepared. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was holding all the cards. My phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Dad, did you check the ticket yet? I've been thinking about it all day. Call me as soon as you know something." I stared at that message, noting the urgency, the assumption that I would naturally call her first with any news about my own life. Instead of calling, I typed back, "We'll check tonight. How's your week going?" Her response came immediately. "Good, but Dad, seriously, check that ticket. I have a feeling about this." A feeling. As if her intuition about my potential good fortune was somehow more relevant than my actual experience of it. I turned off my phone without responding. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Richard stood in my hallway, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. He was dressed casually, but even his weekend clothes probably cost more than I spent on clothing in a year. "Richard," I said, opening the door, "this is a surprise." "Tom, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to talk to you about something." I invited him in, noting how his eyes took in my small living room. He accepted my offer of coffee, but didn't drink it. "Tom, I need to be honest about something," he began. "About Father's Day, about that cruise gift. I know where the money came from. Evelyn told me she'd borrowed it from you. Your emergency fund." The admission hung in the air. Richard set down his untouched coffee. I should have said something right then, should have refused the gift. I've been where you are, Tom. 25 years ago, when I was just starting the business, working 18-hour days, my ex-wife used to criticize everything. The apartment we lived in, the car I drove. She wanted me to be successful, but she was ashamed of the work it took to get there. This was the most personal thing Richard had ever shared with me. When Evelyn talks about you, he continued, sometimes I hear echoes of that. She loves you, but she's also embarrassed by you, and that's not fair. No, I said quietly, it's not. The truth is, I've never needed that cruise. But you needed that $15,000. That was your security, and she took it to buy me something I didn't want. Richard stood up, pacing to the window. I've been trying to figure out how to give the money back without making things worse between you and Evelyn. Richard, I said slowly, what if I told you that $15,000 wasn't going to be a problem for me much longer? He looked puzzled. What do you mean? I walked to my desk and pulled out the lottery certificate. I handed it to Richard without explanation. His eyes widened as he read the numbers. Tom, this is real? $120 million, $75 million after taxes. Richard sank back into his chair. The ticket Evelyn gave you for Father's Day. The same numbers I've played for 20 years. Does she know? Not yet. Richard was quiet for a moment. She told you half would be hers if you won. She did. And now? Now I'm going to teach her something about assumptions. I'm establishing a charitable foundation, the Amanda Mitchell Foundation for Single Fathers. All of it, Richard. Every penny. Richard's eyebrows rose. All of it? She spent 35 years believing that my money was her money, that my sacrifices were investments in her future. She's about to learn that generosity is a choice, not an entitlement. Richard stood up, extending his hand. For what it's worth, Tom, I think you're handling this exactly right. After he left, I called Evelyn. She answered on the first ring. Dad, did you check the ticket? I did. Silence. Then, and? Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow night? We can talk about it then. Dad, you're killing me here. Just tell me, did we win or not? We, I repeated quietly. Interesting choice of words. Can't you just tell me now? Tomorrow, Evelyn. Some conversations are better had in person. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about the little girl who used to help me make spaghetti sauce, standing on a step stool to reach the counter. Tomorrow night, I was going to find out if any part of that child still existed, or if she'd been completely replaced by the woman who saw me as an embarrassment. Either way, she was about to learn that the man she'd been taking for granted had some surprises left in him. I woke Sunday morning with the kind of clarity that only comes after making a decision that changes everything. The lottery certificate sat in my desk drawer next to the foundation paperwork, but more importantly, I finally understood what I was going to do with both. Harold Morrison called just after breakfast. Tom, I've finished the preliminary foundation documents. When would you like to review them? This afternoon, if possible. I want everything ready by tomorrow. That's quite fast. Are you sure you don't want more time to consider? Harold, I've had 35 years to consider what matters most to me. I'm ready. We spent 3 hours that afternoon going over every detail. The Amanda Mitchell Foundation would be operational within the week, with an initial endowment of $75 million. Helen Carter, the retired social worker I'd hired as program director, would start immediately. The first grants would be awarded within 60 days. This is remarkable, Tom, Harold said as we finished signing the final papers. You're creating something that will help hundreds of families. Thousands, I hope. Eventually. That evening, my phone rang. It was Evelyn, her voice bright with excitement. Dad, I just had the most wonderful idea. Since you won't tell me anything about the lottery ticket over the phone, why don't you come to dinner tomorrow night? At Richard's house. We're having a family gathering anyway. Michael's brothers are coming with their wives, and Richard's sister will be there with her husband. It'll be perfect for sharing our good news. Our good news. Even now, even before she knew for certain what had happened, she was already claiming ownership of whatever fortune might await us. I don't know, sweetheart. That sounds like a big crowd for... Dad, please. I've been going crazy all week wondering about that ticket, And if we really did win something significant, don't you think the family should hear about it together? Richard has been so generous to us over the years. He deserves to share in this moment. Richard, who had purchased his own generosity with my emergency fund. Richard, who would be receiving the credit for a gift I had unknowingly paid for. The irony was so thick I could taste it. "All right," I said finally. "What time?" 7 o'clock. "And Dad? Bring the ticket. Whatever it is, whatever we won, let's make it a celebration to remember." After I hung up, I sat in my small living room and thought about what tomorrow evening would bring. Evelyn had just orchestrated the perfect stage for her own public humiliation, complete with an audience of in-laws and extended family members who had watched me be relegated to the margins of every family gathering for the past 5 years. I thought about backing out, about calling her and insisting we handle this privately. But then I remembered the smirk on her face as she'd handed me that crumpled lottery ticket, the casual cruelty of her assumption that half of any winnings would automatically belong to her. I remembered the $15,000 of my emergency fund transformed into Richard's Father's Day cruise and the lie she'd told to cover up what she'd done. Some lessons, I realized, required an audience to be fully understood. Monday evening arrived with unseasonable coolness, as if the weather itself understood that this was a night for reckonings rather than celebrations. I drove to Richard's house in Westchester, the lottery certificate folded carefully in my jacket pocket, the foundation paperwork in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. The circular driveway was crowded with luxury cars, Michael's brother's matching BMWs, Richard's sister's Mercedes, the Tesla that belonged to someone whose name I'd never quite caught. My 15-year-old truck looked like a refugee from a different century as I parked it behind the line of gleaming metal and glass. Richard answered the door himself, and I could see the strain in his eyes as he shook my hand. "Tom," he said quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." Evelyn was very persuasive. She's been talking about this dinner all week, about sharing the good news with the family. He paused, studying my face. "She doesn't know what you've decided to do with the money, does she? She knows I won the lottery. She doesn't know what that's going to mean for her. And you're planning to tell her tonight? In front of everyone?" "I'm planning to tell everyone tonight, all at once. No more secrets, no more private arrangements, no more managing other people's expectations to spare their feelings." Richard nodded slowly, understanding passing between us like a current. "She's not going to take it well." "No," I said, "she's not." The living room was filled with the sound of comfortable conversation and clinking wine glasses. Michael's brothers, David and Jonathan, were successful men in their own right, one a surgeon, the other a federal prosecutor. Their wives, polished and elegant, wore the kind of jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. Richard's sister Margaret was holding court near the fireplace, regaling the group with stories from her recent trip to the south of France. And in the center of it all was Evelyn, radiant in a cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, moving from group to group with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to work a room full of wealthy people. She spotted me the moment I entered and crossed the room with quick, purposeful steps. "Dad," she said, kissing my cheek with theatrical warmth. "I'm so glad you're here. Everyone's been dying to hear your news." "Have they?" "Of course they have. It's not every day someone in the family wins the lottery." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "You did bring the ticket, didn't you? Please tell me you brought the ticket." I patted my jacket pocket. "I brought everything you asked me to bring." Before I could say anything else, Richard appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine and a strained smile. "Tom, let me introduce you to some people you might not have met." He guided me toward a group near the windows, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting toward Evelyn as she continued to work the room. The next hour passed in a blur of small talk and careful pleasantries. Michael's brothers were polite but distant, the kind of men who had learned to be gracious to their social inferiors without actually engaging with them. Their wives smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, but I could see them cataloging my appearance, my clothing, my obvious discomfort in their carefully curated world. Richard's sister was more direct in her assessment. "So, you're Evelyn's father," she said during a lull in the conversation. "The mechanic. I've heard so much about you." I was sure she had. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space that could have comfortably seated 20 people around its mahogany table. I found myself placed between David's wife, Sarah, and Richard's brother-in-law, Jack, an investment banker whose conversation consisted entirely of complaints about his tax burden and the difficulty of finding good help for his house in the Hamptons. Evelyn, seated directly across from me, kept catching my eye throughout the meal, raising her eyebrows meaningfully, clearly expecting me to make some sort of announcement. But I waited, letting the conversation flow around me, watching the dynamics of this family that had never quite made room for me, despite my daughter's marriage. The conversation had turned to vacation plans, with Michael's brothers comparing notes about their upcoming trips to Martha's Vineyard and the Hamptons. Richard's hand tightened around his wine glass, his eyes darting toward me across the table. "Actually," Richard said suddenly, cutting through the chatter, "there's something I need to discuss. About the cruise Evelyn gave me for Father's Day." The table went quiet. Evelyn's face lit up with pride, clearly expecting praise. "I can't accept it," he said flatly, pulling out the white envelope and placing it on the table. "What do you mean?" Evelyn whispered. "Because I know where the money came from. Your father's emergency fund. $15,000 you told him was for an investment." The explosion was immediate. "How dare you?" Evelyn shot to her feet. "How dare you embarrass me like this, in front of everyone?" "I was the unwitting recipient of your deception," Richard said quietly. "I spent 2 weeks feeling guilty about accepting such an expensive gift, only to discover you purchased it with your father's savings and lied about where the money came from." Margaret leaned forward, eyes bright with gossip. "Evelyn used her father's money to buy you a gift?" $15,000, Richard confirmed. "Tom's entire emergency fund." "It's not like that." Evelyn's voice was rising toward hysteria. "Dad doesn't need the money. He lives in that tiny apartment, drives that ancient truck. He was just going to let it sit in the bank forever." "So you decided to spend it for him?" Jonathan, the prosecutor, asked with cutting precision. "I was being practical. Richard deserved something nice, and Dad wouldn't have done anything with the money anyway. It's not like I stole it." "What would you call it?" David asked. Evelyn was spiraling now. "You don't understand. None of you understand what it's like. You all have money, you all fit in here. But Dad—" She gestured wildly at me. "Look at him. I can't bring him anywhere without people making assumptions about what kind of family we are." The silence was deafening. Margaret's mouth fell open. Michael looked mortified. "So you're ashamed of your father," Richard said quietly. "I'm tired of having to explain him. I'm tired of managing other people's expectations because he won't improve his situation." "What situation would that be?" I asked quietly. Evelyn turned to face me, tears streaming, her composure shattered. "Your apartment, Dad, your job, your whole life. Don't you want to be someone your daughter can be proud of?" "I thought I was," I said simply. The words hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, gasping. "But the lottery ticket," she said desperately. "Dad, tell them about the lottery ticket. Tell them what we won." I placed the certificate on the table. $120 million. Evelyn's tears stopped instantly, her face lighting up with greedy excitement. "We won. We're actually rich." "There's that word again," I said quietly. "We." "Of course we. Half of that money is mine. That's what I said when I gave you the ticket." "Actually," I said, pulling out the foundation paperwork, "I've already decided what to do with the money." Relief flooded her features. "Oh, good. I was worried you might make impulsive decisions. I'm establishing a charitable foundation, the Amanda Mitchell Foundation for Single Fathers. Every dollar of the $75 million left after taxes is going into an endowment." "All of it?" Margaret whispered. "All of it." Evelyn's face went through confusion, disbelief, panic, and finally devastating rage. "You can't do that. That money is mine. Half of it is mine." "Without you," I said quietly, "I never would have understood what I needed to learn." "What the hell does that mean?" "It means that for 35 years I defined myself by what I could give you. For the last 5 years, I've watched you define me by what I couldn't give you. This lottery win has shown me the difference between loving someone and letting them destroy you in the name of that love." Each accusation I'd made earlier came flooding back. The emergency fund, the introductions with apologies, the 5 years of embarrassment. I could see her defenses crumbling. "But I love you, Dad. You know I love you." "I do know that. But love without respect isn't love, Evelyn. It's needed. It's convenient. So you're abandoning me? I'm teaching you to stand on your own feet." She stared at me, her face cycling through emotions. "There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told me." I nodded slowly. "Your kidney transplant 2 years ago. The anonymous donor." Understanding dawned in her eyes like a terrible sunrise. "No," she whispered. "I gave you one of my kidneys, Evelyn." But that's impossible. Richard paid for that donor. He told me he'd arranged everything, that he had connections at the hospital, that money could make miracles happen when you knew the right people." The table went completely silent. Richard's face had gone ashen. "Richard never paid anyone," I said quietly. "There was no money involved, no connections, no arrangements, just a father who registered as a donor the day after his daughter's diagnosis." "That's not true," she said desperately, turning to Richard. "Dad, Richard, tell him. Tell him about the specialist you contacted, the strings you pulled. You said wealthy people could always find donors if they were willing to pay enough." "Evelyn," Richard said, his voice barely audible, "I never said that. I never arranged anything. When you asked me how we found such a perfect match so quickly, I told you that sometimes miracles just happen." "But you implied, you let me believe. All these years I thought you'd saved my life. I thought that's why I owed you so much respect, so much gratitude." She was hyperventilating now, her carefully constructed worldview crumbling piece by piece. "I've been trying to repay you for 2 years. The cruise, the expensive gifts, the way I've been treating you like the father who actually mattered, while treating your real father like an embarrassment," Richard finished, his voice heavy with shame. "Evelyn, I should have corrected your assumption immediately. I let you believe what you wanted to believe because it made me feel important, needed. I was selfish." She turned back to me, her eyes wild with the realization of what she'd done. "You gave me a kidney. You gave me a piece of your body to save my life, and I thanked Richard for it. I've been thanking the wrong man for 2 years while treating you like someone whose life didn't matter," I said gently. "Like someone whose sacrifices were just expected, not appreciated." The sound that came out of her wasn't quite human, part sob, part scream, part the death of everything she thought she knew about herself. She collapsed into her chair, folding in on herself. The rest of the table sat in stunned silence, witnesses to a reckoning 35 years in the making. Margaret was the first to speak. "You gave your daughter a kidney, and she wanted to put you in assisted living?" Evelyn's head snapped up, eyes wild. "It wasn't like that. I was trying to help him find somewhere nicer." "Somewhere you wouldn't have to visit as often?" Sarah asked. "That's not fair." "Evelyn, stop," Michael said. "Just stop." But she couldn't stop. The dam had burst completely. "Yes, okay? Yes, I wanted to fit in here. I wanted to belong somewhere that wasn't small and sad and limited. I wanted to be part of a family that had respect instead of being the daughter of a mechanic who lives in a 1-bedroom apartment." "Jesus Christ, Evelyn," Jonathan said with pure disgust. "Don't judge me. You've all had everything handed to you. You've never had to claw your way up, never had to pretend your father's life choices weren't holding you back." "The life you deserved?" Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. "The one your father paid for with his blood and his kidney and his savings?" "Everything you built," I said quietly, "you built on the foundation of my sacrifices. And instead of being grateful for that foundation, you've spent 5 years being ashamed of it." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Around the table, judgment was written on every face, not directed at me, but at her. Slowly she stood and walked around the table to where I sat. Without a word, she knelt beside my chair and took my hands. "I have been the worst daughter in the history of daughters," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I have taken every sacrifice you ever made and twisted it into something to be ashamed of." She looked around at the witnesses. My father is the most generous, selfless, loving man any of you will ever meet. And I repaid him by stealing his savings and treating him like an embarrassment instead of the hero he is." She turned back to me. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Dad, but if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life trying to become the kind of person who does." And in that moment, surrounded by witnesses to her complete moral collapse and rebirth, I finally saw my daughter clearly for the first time in years. But even as I looked down at her kneeling form, her hands clutching mine with desperate sincerity, I knew that words spoken in crisis were different from choices made in calm moments. Evelyn had just experienced the kind of shock that could temporarily realign anyone's moral compass. But the real test would come in the weeks and months that followed, when the immediate shame had faded and the hard work of actually changing began. "Stand up, sweetheart," I said gently, helping her to her feet. "Don't kneel to me. Don't kneel to anyone." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing what remained of her makeup. "I don't know how to fix this, Dad. I don't even know where to start." "You start," said a voice from the doorway, "by understanding that some things can't be fixed. They can only be learned from." We all turned to see Harold Morrison standing in the entrance to the dining room, his silver hair slightly disheveled, his usually impeccable suit wrinkled as if he'd driven here in haste. Richard must have called him during the confrontation, I realized. Harold's presence could only mean one thing. "Mr. Morrison," Richard said, standing, "thank you for coming on such short notice." Harold nodded, his lawyer's eyes quickly assessing the scene, the scattered papers on the table, the overturned chairs, the faces marked by tears and shock and judgment. "I apologize for the intrusion, but Tom asked me to bring the final foundation documents for his signature. I understand there's been some discussion about the lottery winnings." "Discussion," Margaret repeated with a bitter laugh. "That's one way to put it." Harold's gaze found mine across the room. "Tom, are you certain you want to proceed? I have to ask one final time, as your legal counsel. $75 million is not a decision to make lightly, especially in the heat of an emotional moment." The room fell silent. Even Evelyn seemed to hold her breath, perhaps hoping that her public confession might have changed my mind, that the witness to her breakdown might have earned her some form of reprieve. "I'm certain, Harold, more certain than I've been about anything in my life." He nodded and opened his briefcase, removing a thick folder of documents. "Then we'll need witnesses for the signatures. The foundation will be legally established the moment these papers are signed." "Wait," Evelyn said, her voice small but urgent. "Dad, please, just give me a chance. Give me time to prove that I can change, that I can be the daughter you deserve. Don't do something this permanent when I'm finally understanding what I've done wrong." I looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the successful marketing executive or the polished society wife, but the 12-year-old girl who had clung to me in the hospital after her mother died, promising that we would take care of each other no matter what. "Evelyn," I said quietly, "what do you think would happen if I kept this money? What do you think would change between us? I would change. I would be better. You would try to be better," I interrupted. "For a while. Maybe even for a long while, but eventually the money would become normal to you. The foundation would become something we used to talk about back when you were going through that difficult phase. And we would settle into a new normal where I was wealthy and generous, and you were grateful and attentive, and neither of us would ever be quite sure whether your love was real or whether it was just a very sophisticated form of self-interest." She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Around the table, I could see understanding dawning on other faces as well. Even Michael, who had remained largely silent throughout the evening, nodded slowly. "The money has to go," I continued, "not as punishment, but as liberation, for both of us." Harold had been quietly arranging papers while we spoke. Now he looked up. "I'll need 3 witnesses for each signature," he said. "Are there volunteers?" Richard stepped forward immediately. "I'll witness." "As will I," said David the surgeon. This is the most honorable thing I've ever seen anyone do." Margaret surprised everyone by raising her hand as well. "I'll witness," she said, her voice subdued. "I think we've all learned something tonight about what really matters." The signing took 15 minutes. Each page required my signature and initials, Each signature required 3 witnesses. Each witness required their own signature and printed name and date. It was tedious, bureaucratic work that somehow felt sacred in its precision and finality. When it was done, Harold closed the folder and slipped it back into his briefcase. "Congratulations, Tom. The Amanda Mitchell Foundation is now officially established with an endowment of $75 million. The first board meeting is scheduled for next Friday." "What happens now?" Evelyn asked. She had been standing quietly beside my chair throughout the signing process, occasionally reaching out to touch my shoulder as if to reassure herself that I was still there. "Now," Harold said, "your father goes back to his life. The money goes to work helping single fathers across the country, and you figure out who you want to be when you can't rely on anyone else's resources." "And us?" she asked, looking at me. "What happens to us?" "That," I said, "is entirely up to you. I'll be the same person I've always been. I'll live in the same apartment, drive the same truck, do the same work. The only thing that's changed is that you now know exactly what I think our relationship is worth." $75 million, she whispered. "No," I said firmly, "our relationship isn't worth $75 million. Our relationship is worth whatever you choose to put into it from now on. The $75 million is what it cost to teach you that lesson." Michael spoke for the first time in an hour. "Dad," he said, addressing his father, "I think Evelyn and I need to go home now. We have a lot to talk about." Richard nodded. "Of course. Tom, would you like a ride home?" "I'll drive myself, thanks. I need some time to think." As the family began to disperse, gathering coats and purses and making awkward small talk about anything other than what had just transpired, Evelyn lingered beside my chair. "Dad," she said quietly, "will you still take my calls? If I call you tomorrow or next week or next month, will you answer?" "I'll always answer your calls, Evelyn, but I won't always give you what you're calling to ask for." "I understand." She paused, then added, "I think I'm going to need therapy. Professional help. I don't know how to be a good person without using other people." "That sounds like a wise first step. And I think I need to get a job, a real job, not just the consulting work I've been doing. Something where I earn my own way." "Also wise." She bent down and kissed my forehead, a gesture so reminiscent of childhood that it made my throat tight. "I love you, Dad. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know that this time I understand what it means." "I love you too, sweetheart. I always have. I always will. But love isn't enough to build a relationship on. There has to be respect, trust, and basic human decency. Those are things you'll have to earn back." "I know," she said, "and I will. However long it takes, I will." After everyone left, I sat alone in Richard's dining room, looking at the empty chairs and scattered napkins and half-finished desserts that were the debris of the most important conversation of my life. Harold had offered to drive me home, but I'd wanted these few minutes of quiet to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Evelyn, sent from her car in the driveway. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me fail. I won't waste this chance." I typed back, "You're welcome. Drive safe." Then I called Harold, who was probably halfway back to his office by now. "Tom, is everything all right?" "Everything is fine. I just wanted to ask you about something. The foundation. When we start making grants, I'd like to include a mentorship component. Not just money, but guidance, support, someone to help these fathers navigate the challenges of raising children alone. That's a beautiful addition to the mission. Do you have someone in mind to run that program?" I looked around the empty dining room, thinking about second chances and hard-learned lessons and the difference between enabling and empowering. "Actually," I said, "I think I might know the perfect person, but she's going to need some time to figure out who she is first." "Ah," Harold said, understanding immediately. "Well, the foundation will be there when she's ready." "Yes," I said, smiling for the first time all evening. "It will be." 20 minutes later, I was driving home through the quiet streets of Westchester County, past the perfect lawns and perfect houses where perfect families live their imperfect lives behind closed doors. My ancient truck rattled and wheezed, and the radio played static-filled classic rock, and I had never felt richer in my life. Not because of the money I'd given away, but because of the daughter I'd finally gotten back. The lottery ticket that had started this entire journey was still in my wallet, creased and worn from being handled so many times over the past week. As I stopped at a red light, I pulled it out and looked at the numbers one more time: 15, 23, 42, 8, 19, 31. Dates that had once represented the most important moments of my relationship with Evelyn: her birth, her mother's death, our wedding anniversary. Numbers that had seemed so significant when I chose them 20 years ago, believing they would somehow bring me luck. But luck, I understood now, wasn't about winning money or having good things happen to you without effort. Real luck was having people in your life who loved you enough to tell you the truth, even when that truth was painful. Real luck was being given the opportunity to choose who you wanted to be, rather than simply accepting who circumstances had made you. The light turned green, and I tucked the ticket back into my wallet. Not because it had any value anymore. The prize had been claimed, the money distributed, the foundation established. But because it had become something else entirely. A reminder of the day I learned the difference between being loved and being needed, between being generous and being taken advantage of, between enabling someone and actually helping them. Tomorrow, I would wake up in the same small apartment I'd called home for 15 years. I would make coffee in the same chipped mug, read the same newspaper, maybe work on Mrs. Patterson's transmission if she brought her car by. My life would look exactly the same from the outside, but everything that mattered had changed. Evelyn would wake up in her beautiful house with its marble counters and imported fixtures, but for the first time in years, she would wake up poor. Not financially. Michael's family wealth would ensure she never wanted for material comfort, but poor in the ways that actually mattered. Poor in self-respect, poor in genuine relationships, poor in the kind of love that didn't come with conditions or expectations. But poverty, I had learned over the course of 35 years, could be the beginning of wisdom if you let it teach you rather than defeat you. And my daughter, for all her faults and failures, had inherited my stubborn streak. If she decided to learn from this experience rather than simply survive it, there was no limit to who she might become. The foundation would help other fathers avoid the mistakes I'd made, but more importantly, it would stand as proof that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was just another form of neglect dressed up in prettier clothes. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I realized I was smiling. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of the Amanda Mitchell Foundation, looking out at 50 single fathers who had gathered for our first annual grant ceremony. The foundation had awarded nearly $2 million in grants that first year, helping with everything from educational expenses to medical bills to emergency housing. "Thank you all for being here," I said, addressing the group. When I established this foundation, I wanted to honor the memory of my wife Amanda and to help other fathers who are walking the path I walked for 15 years. The applause was warm and genuine. After the ceremony, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that extended beyond my own small life. Helen Carter, the foundation's program director, approached me with new applications. 347 new requests this week, she said. Word is getting out. Evelyn and I had spoken several times since that difficult dinner. The conversations were different now, more honest, less performative. She'd returned to work after Richard cut off financial support, discovering capabilities she'd forgotten she possessed. "I got a promotion," she'd told me recently, her voice carrying surprised pride. "Senior account manager, 30% salary increase." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You earned it." She'd started volunteering at a food bank and moved into a smaller place she could afford on her own salary. I'd moved into a modest 2-bedroom place closer to the foundation offices. The lottery ticket that had started this transformation was now framed above my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the most worthless-looking things carry the greatest potential for change. One evening in December, Evelyn called from her Manhattan apartment. "Dad, I have something to tell you. Michael and I are getting divorced." "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm scared, but also relieved. We were never really partners. We were just two people sharing resources and pretending that was the same thing as sharing a life. The following weekend, she came to visit me. We made spaghetti together using Amanda's recipe, and for the first time in years, the conversation felt natural. She told me about her work and volunteer activities. I told her about the foundation's growth. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said while cleaning up. "Not because of the money, but because of what you built with it. Mom would be proud too." As I walked her to her car, she stopped and faced me. "Dad, do you forgive me? For the way I treated you, for taking you for granted?" I looked at my daughter, this woman who had caused me so much pain and brought me so much joy. "Evelyn, forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you accept or reject. I forgave you the moment I decided to love you more than I loved my own hurt feelings." "When was that?" "About 35 years ago, when you were born. Everything since then has just been me learning what forgiveness actually means." She hugged me then, not the perfunctory embrace of obligation, but the fierce, grateful hug of someone who had been lost and was finally finding her way home. After she left, I stood on my small balcony, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the strange mathematics of love and loss. The lottery ticket had been worth exactly what I'd paid for it, $2. But the lessons it had taught, the changes it had catalyzed, the relationships it had transformed, those were priceless. In my wallet, I still carried the same numbers I'd played for 20 years. Not because I expected to win again, but because they reminded me of something important, that the most valuable prizes aren't the ones we hope to receive, but the ones we choose to give away. Sometimes the greatest fortune comes not from having your numbers called, but from finally understanding what numbers really matter. And sometimes the most generous thing you can do for someone you love is to stop giving them what they want and start giving them what they need. I won more than money that day. I won my self-respect back, my sense of purpose, and most importantly, my daughter's respect. But the real victory wasn't the lottery ticket at all. It was learning that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just enabling good intentions. The Amanda Mitchell Foundation continues to grow, helping single fathers across the country build better futures for their children. And Evelyn continues to grow too, discovering strength she never knew she possessed and learning to love people without expecting anything in return. As for me, I've learned that sometimes the most worthless-looking gifts carry the most transformative power. And sometimes the best way to teach someone what they're worth is to stop accepting less than you deserve. If you enjoyed this story of family, forgiveness, and finding your true worth, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Share your thoughts about Tom's decision in the comments. Would you have done the same thing with $120 million? Click the box on the left to listen to our next story about life's unexpected lessons. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone is the chance to discover their own strength.